Yes.
All right, everybody, good afternoon. It is Tuesday, February 5th, 2019 at 1:30, and I'm calling this meeting of the Wausau Waterworks Commission to order. We'll begin with the agenda with item number 1, approving the minutes of the January 8th, 2019 meeting. If there's no questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion. Is that a motion, Mr. Forrest, or you got a
No, I
question?
did have a question.
Go ahead, sir.
We had asked about our involvement in the Wisconsin River Discharge Group at the last meeting, and I believe the Public Works Director indicated we were going to pursue that. I just wondered if anything had happened on that.
You're up.
Nothing formal, other than, they haven't provided any responses or anything beyond, I think, what we presented in January at this point in time. Any communications that do come out, I think, is it Rich Bowden is kind of leading that, so he keeps all of us informed as well if there's anything else. We're also monitoring the APWA, updates from the legislators and stuff and what's happening on Capitol Hill as well. So,
Okay.
Any other comments?
Move to accept.
Motion by Mr. Forrest. Do I have a second by Mr. Jean? Those commissioners in favor of the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That item carries. Item number 2, the director's report on utility operations. Are there any questions or comments?
Couple of questions. I'm pleased to see we still have some money left for the lead lateral replacements, and the statement is made that these funds must be used by 2020. Is there any update as to our plan to spend the money by supporting lead pipe replacements in any particular area? Or are we going to continue to follow the policy that we've had, which I believe was to replace, when we replace the street infrastructure? Anything new on that?
yeah, right now we're following the reconstruction projects. So the notices for this year's reconstruction projects, First Avenue, Thomas Street, and Town Line Road. Formal notices will go out again this spring in allowing those homeowners to apply and get their application in to have their services replaced. I had talked with Scott and Cheryl about once we know which services this spring are going to be replaced on those reconstruction projects, that we move forward down the list rather than waiting again for next year. Because I think that if there is another funding that's allocated, I think it would look better if we had expended our funds than if we're just hanging on to funds. So
The $69,000 left from 2017, does that lapse at the end of this year, or does that continue to be available?
do you know the deadline for that, Scott?
The deadline to use those funds would be June of next year, but we won't have any issue expending those funds this summer.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Joe.
Has the date been set with the meeting at the tech?
No, not yet. It hasn't been set yet. So as soon as the tech gives us some dates and some rooms, we're anticipating allowing at least up to 30 people. We could have more, but and then once we get some confirmed dates, we'll send those out. We're anticipating mid-February.
Right. I'm planning on at least 2, so go ahead, Joe.
Is there, I don't think it's mentioned in here, but
Can you use your microphone, please? Just for the record, I'm sorry.
I know you had a meeting with the Village of Brokaw, or Village of Maine, I should say, apologize.
We're going to
Is
be
there any
updating you on that.
Oh, you will be? Okay, very good, thank you.
And one other thing, too, it's a little early, but I'll mention it right now, seeing how that you had brought it up. Wednesday, February 20th, myself and Eric will be given a presentation as far as, for the media, a press conference, if you will, as far as different things going on with the infrastructure, in particular with the water utility and the sewage and everything like that, just to let folks know as far as what's going, what the possible costs would be. This has been mentioned numerous times out in the media, again with the neighborhood groups. We've already been to a couple neighborhood groups and spoke about it. It has been positively received for the most part, so that's just to let everybody know. And I think I've got it scheduled for Wednesday the 20th at 10 a.m. in this chamber, so give everybody a heads up. Any other questions in regards for the director's report? Go ahead, Mayor.
I think, when we look at the updates on the water and the wastewater plant, part of the water plant would be our conversations with the Village of Maine and the water agreement. And so I think, as the mayor had stated, we did have a conversation on that, and it came pretty quickly. And so it has been drafted. I believe a copy was emailed out to the commission. I don't know if everybody had seen it. But, back in '07, the water agreement was initially approved by the commission and then on to council. But with we're doing an amendment to that agreement, correct, Ann? And so,
Attachment's complete.
right now that Brokaw has been attached to Maine, and those came through pretty quickly. We did not have time to agendize it when we got that from the village. So, if you have any comments on that when you have a chance to review it, we plan on taking that to council next week. And so if any of the commission members or anybody has any comments on that agreement, please let us know and we'll bring those up to council.
It's just a basic initial water agreement, if you will. And like I said, we met with the Village of Maine last Wednesday. It was a very good, positive meeting, turned out that
Okay,
way.
thanks.
And we're hopeful that things can move forward like they had been earlier this summer into the fall.
Okay.
So things are back on track in a lot of ways. And my apologies as far as if you did not receive that, but we did try to get that out as soon as that we were going to be moving forward with that. Not too many changes, frankly, so.
Okay. And then on the discharge permit, the contested case, you did see the response in the packet from the DNR, that they did accept that case, and so we'll move forward with that, which is a good news on our part. And they did request a stay on the judicial review because we submitted both of those at the same time. And so being as they accepted the contested case, then we'll go ahead and, I don't know the legal terms on that end, but we'll go ahead and, pursue that avenue and put a stay on the judicial, the contested hearing. Thank you.
And that'll also be on council on Tuesday in closed session.
Eric,
Okay.
I noticed in your report you have a couple of paragraphs on the phosphorus issue and the Green Bay Adapted Management Program.
Yes.
Is there anything new on that other than what's in our packet?
No, there has not been. I think, that article came out in the local press, and so I felt like there was some information missing on that. And how that compared to the city of Wausau and what we're proposing to do. So I had reached out to Donahue along with some other people, and I think Jeremy Kramer with Donahue, who's part of our design team as well, he's been intimately involved in that. So I thought he explained that fairly well, so I thought it'd be important to put it in here. But I have not had any other information or to share.
Is it your feeling that the best way to reach the DNR with our message on this is through that dischargers group?
I do, and I think that's the strongest way, that our message will get across. And so, we are proposing as well with the regionalization that's coming up to have a meeting with the DNR as well on some additional incentives for regionalization. The mayor has made a request and reached out to many of the legislators as well as some of the heads of the DNR. We are going to try to get a meeting together with them. I think this is another issue that would be a good roundtable to discuss and put our feelings on the table with this as well. And we'll keep the dischargers group informed of how we're pursuing this as well and our concerns that in the rural community and how really it's us that are getting regulated and nobody else really is at this point in time. So.
Any other questions or concerns?
Just one other, do you
ahead,
think
sir.
our local legislators, senator and assemblyman, understand that?
I believe so. I'm going to be talking to them again here pretty soon as far as this and some other things going on. That's a good question.
I do think they get lobbied heavily from the ag industry.
I know they do.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that, from our side, we need to lobby on our side.
And
And
say
I
this isn't
fully
on
agree
us.
with you, Joe, that they're not hearing from us enough.
Thank you.
So,
Yes.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, now, I learned something new after the last meeting, and through our city attorney, the director's report on utility operations is not an actionable item. We don't have to vote on it. We simply accept it and put it into the record. So we will not be doing that from here on out. Okay, moving on to item number 3, a request for approval of a sole source purchase of a truck chassis. Mr. Lindman.
yeah, thanks, Ann. Scott, I'll let you
Oh,
go ahead.
Scott,
and
sorry.
explain.
That's what happens when you don't attend the meeting.
That's- Scott was involved.
This is just a request for approval of a sole source purchase of a truck chassis to replace our sludge hauling truck right now. It was brought to my attention, it might not have been worded correctly. The price, total price for the truck is $118,198. They were offering us $13,000 for a trade-in of our equipment that we have now, which would bring the price to $105,198 plus the trade-in.
How old is that last? That's the other one.
The other one is a 2001.
Okay. All right. Any questions? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Mr. Jean. Do I have a second? By Ms. Herbst. Those commissioners in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That item carries. Item number 4, discussion and possible action on Marathon County contract agreement for mercury reduction program. Go ahead, Dave. Surprise.
This is essentially the same agreement we've had for the past several years. At one time, when we had our permit, our WPDES permit, that was 5 years. So then we were renewing this agreement with Marathon County for 5 years. But when that permit expired and it hadn't been renewed, we were kind of doing it on a year-by-year basis, waiting for the permit to come out. And so the one difference here is this is for 5 years rather than for 1. But there is an option to terminate it, and we've been working well with the county, so I'd recommend that we approve it.
Any questions or comments? Go ahead, Mr. Jean.
Does the Rib Mountain Metro have a similar agreement? And, okay.
Same agreement with Rib Mountain. We're kind of working together, Rib Mountain Metro, the health department, and ourselves.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to accept this. Motion by Ms. Herbst, second by Mr. Forrest. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That item carries. Item number 5, discussion and possible action regarding the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources notice of noncompliance flow rate under reportings. And Dave, if you want to address this one too, please.
We've discussed before several times the issues we've had with the older SCADA computers and the SCADA program itself. And so there were a number of intervals where we didn't have complete data on our influent flow meter, and that's required by our permit. There isn't a limit on it or anything, but it is important information if you're evaluating the performance of the plant to be able to compare what's coming in and what's going out. So the DNR sent us a letter, and we've got a reply. And so the immediate responses were measuring the flow manually every morning on working days. And so that satisfies their immediate request. There's 3 things that are in the works. When we, assuming our preliminary design or something like it is approved, we'll have new influent meters, and they'll give us more information. There'll be an influent meter for each of our influent pumps. So that, at that point, that'll take care of our problem. But that's 3 years or so down the road. We also have been working with a local electrical firm to put in place a temporary stopgap measure in between, but that's going to take some time also. But then the thing that's in a matter of weeks is we've worked with another firm to order, it's not expensive, a couple $100 for a digital device that will record that flow so we can download it to a laptop computer. And we should be able to have that in for a few weeks without spending very much money.
Any comments?
Are there any fines associated with our noncompliance?
No, I don't believe so. One thing I had considered after writing that letter is that second option. I don't know that we'd have to put that in there. The DNR, once we say we're going to do it, then it's kind of hard to undo it sometimes. So we maybe don't want to commit to more than the requirements.
Mr. Jean?
I get the impression that we only had 28 reported going to March, then 20 in April. We didn't give estimated numbers?
Up till a year or so ago, when we'd have problems like this, I just estimate the influent flow based on the effluent meter. But our new DNR basin engineer doesn't want it that way. If we don't have that data from that meter, he wants it blank because we didn't record it. So there's no estimating or no using the effluent. So that's kind of a change. And initially, since we started having this trouble, we've gotten quicker on responding. We've taken manual readings before when that system was down. But if we come in the morning and the systems went down the evening before, we're already 2 days behind on our data. So we have incomplete data for 2 days, and then we have a lapse.
Is that a lady that says you're not supposed to put, or I don't care who, a staff person? Why can't, I don't understand why we don't come up with an estimate.
Well, I kind of understand it from his point of view. If I put a number in there, then his computer system doesn't flag it as a problem. If I don't put a number in there, then it pegs it as a problem, and then at the whatever interval, he can look at it and say, well, we've got a problem here. And otherwise, for him, I believe that kind of masks it. So from a logical standpoint, I don't have a problem with that. The NON is kind of official, but it's reasonable that we explain what we're going to do to prevent this problem, and that's really all it's asking for. So, yeah, some ways I would have liked it done different, but I guess I can't complain.
Dave, these temporary fixes that you're talking about, when will they be in effect?
Well, the quickest one will be to have that data recording device, and they've got it ordered. They're going to program it and set it up for us, and so it's a matter of weeks, but it'll still be weeks. Working with the local electrical firm, they've been busy, and that's gone slower than I would have anticipated or liked. We may want to consider going with a different firm to get that done. But once we have that other device in place, then we've got a backup system, and then that would meet his demands. So,
Was he in contact regarding this over the whole year?
yes.
Or did it come out of a annual inspection?
No, we haven't had an annual inspection since that engineer started with the DNR. He didn't start till last June or maybe even July, somewhere in there. And so he's relatively new and maybe does things different, but I can't argue with where he's coming from. There's logic to it.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
sure.
Okay, the actionable item on this, as far as the approval of the draft letter to be sent, I'll entertain a motion to accept that.
So move.
Motion by Mr. Forrest, second by Mr. Jean. Those commissioners in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. That item carries, and that letter will be sent out. Item number 6, discussion and possible action regarding the septic hauler rates. This one too, Dave. So, over the last some months, I've kind of lost track of the time frame, but we recommended that we raise our rates by 20%, and that resolution went to the city council, but it didn't specifically address the portions of the code that covered the septic rates. And that was maybe a good thing, because in looking at it, we were talking about raising those rates by 20%, but we're already quite a bit higher than where Rib Mountain is, as just kind of as a point of reference. And maybe their strategy of charging less, getting more volume and netting more,
that maybe is a good business strategy. They've certainly, our business has dropped and theirs has increased. And so I thought for the time being, and maybe until we get our rate study completed, we should recommend that we keep the rates where we have them.
Mr. Jean?
Just, so the current rates represent prior to the 20% increase?
Yes, that's right.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Any other questions? And again, just a reminder, those rates have not been increased in how long? I hate to put you on the spot like that. It's been some time.
I think it was 2011 or 2012, one of those.
I thought it was longer than that. Okay, thank you for the update. Questions, comments? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to accept staff recommendation. Motion by Mr. Jean. Do I have a second by Ms. Herbst? Commissioners in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That item carries. Item number 7, discuss an impossible action regarding design of a river crossing siphons. Mr. Lindman.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of an update. Becker Hoppy's here as well. But in your packet, you'll see a drawing of where the proposed new siphon lines will be placed as of right now. And I think, you know, you'll see the one that's on Sturgeon Eddy is actually going to move to a separate location and cross further, actually was it west? Further west. And the one that crosses near the Thomas Street Bridge, that one will be fairly close to where it is currently. Do you have anything to add as far as some details, Steve or Ken?
Hello, everybody. Steve Opatic, Becker Hoppy, and Ken Langmigan as well. Not too much to add other than to point out on your exhibit, this one's a little updated from the one in your packet, but the existing siphon at the Sturgeon Eddy sort of kitty corners into a portion of the plant that is scheduled to be where the new sludge storage building would be handled. This is also the siphon that plugged. So moving it west and coming in on the west side of the sludge storage building frees up a lot of space. And in both cases, the new siphons, the existing pipes are a single pipe. The new ones will match existing code, and there will be 2 pipes. In this crossing, it'll be a 12-inch and an 18-inch diameter pipe, and the Thomas Street one will be a 14-inch and a 24-inch pipe. Proposed construction is to bid everything this spring with the intent, if we have favorable prices, we could award both, construction of both. If we don't get a favorable price, the intent would be to only construct the Sturgeon Eddy crossing to basically get in front of the impending work at the wastewater treatment facility. As Eric mentioned, we would have to relay a sewer down Sturgeon Eddy and down the Memorial Park Road. We understand that road, and if you drive past that area, has a very tall retaining wall. We've taken that into consideration of the layout of our piping, and we're going to be discussing that with city staff, not only Public Works, but also engineering in the upcoming days. We'll also be discussing time frame for construction of this work, with the understanding being that at least for a couple of weeks, we would be shutting off access down to the park area, and it may be beneficial to everyone if that work was delayed until later in the summer or after Labor Day when the pool shuts down or some of the other activities down there. That's all I really had for an update.
Questions, comments?
There must be a reason for 2 lines rather than the one.
So if one plugs, you don't have, you have a second one, would be the primary. The differing sizes are also to,
Right.
for just a little more background, the reason this sort of line is called a siphon is you are not pumping the water, but in some areas you're actually having the water flow uphill. You're relying on differing water levels on the high side and the low side to push the water through. And the reason for the smaller pipes is to ensure that you have a sufficient velocity in the pipes so you don't have solids settling out. And then when you get to a higher flow period, then the second pipe can take over the rest of the capacity. But also having two of them there in case you need to do maintenance on one line while the other can take over.
And does the old siphon just sit?
I believe they would be abandoned in place.
We have the choice of keeping them as a double emergency type pipe or abandoning them.
And for the public knowledge, just to remember, these pipes are going back to the 1930s.
1939.
Yes, they are
It was a
original.
good year, so.
A lot of work done in the area at that point in time. These are also the only two places where wastewater generated on the east side of the river crosses over to the west side and to the plant.
Just curious, how are those pipes laid on the bottom of the river?
I believe they are, the existing ones are buried, and the new ones would be buried as well. If you're asking how they're installed, the proposal is to open cut them. There would be an excavator on a barge, and they would basically dig a trench and lay the pipes in it. We looked at directional drilling or directional boring of them, but the preliminary soil borings we have indicate that soil is too granular, too gravelly in nature, and the drilling mud that's required to put in a boring crossing would escape up into the river. We don't have tight enough soils to bore them.
No, that's old river bottom. Is the installation, would that disrupt boat traffic at all, or would that be piecemeal?
Another good question. There could be some impact to it. If you see work on a city street, you have traffic control cones and barricades and things put out. Part of what we need to do for our bid package is come up with a similar traffic control plan for boaters. And that's a permit that we need to apply to the DNR for.
But
Go ahead, Mr. Jean.
You wouldn't be shutting off traffic all the way across the river. In other words, boating wouldn't be able to get up into Oak Island. Would it be blocked, or would there be a portion of the river would be open to traffic?
For 95% of the time, we would not block out the entire river. When it comes to installing the pipelines, the pipes are going to be HDPE pipe, and they're going to float. They're going to construct them as one long noodle,
Yeah.
and they're going to float them across, and then slowly introduce water into the noodle, and then it'll slowly sink. So for that 2-day time period, at each location, the entire river traffic would be blocked.
In later fall, though.
Excuse me?
In later fall. Well,
Well,
early
that's
fall, whatever.
what we're
round of the
discussing.
day.
We think that that's the most reasonable, rational time to do it,
Okay,
but it needs to get done this year.
sure. Joe?
No matter the season, you're going to have some unhappy fishermen.
Potentially, right.
Better fall than spring, I guess.
So I apologize, this is the first time I've seen this, and I would have asked this question, why couldn't we go diagonally across, end up at the same place at the starting point, and then we wouldn't have to interfere with closing that road
It's-
off?
It's the
Expense?
depth of cover. Going diagonally, we come across shallower waters for a longer period of time, so the cost would go up dramatically. To avoid that, we were proposing to push and put a kink in the line to avoid the excavation, but it just wasn't working out. Now, as Steve mentioned, the plan right now is to put the excavated material next to the trench in the river. The department may force us to haul that off-site until we're ready to put the pipe down and then bring it back. And a longer route would just run up that cost exponentially. Even going down Sturgeonetti and into the park is about $100,000 to $200,000 less costly than the diagonal route.
What's the size of the two barrels that'll go across from Sturgeonetti area?
12-inch and 18-inch diameter.
And what size will we change the sanitary sewer, gravity sewer by the plant?
We were, part of, that's a good point, where we will be laying new sewer and meeting up with the interceptor pipe on the west side. That's an existing 30-inch line that goes to the front of the plant. We're going to replace that with a 36-inch diameter sewer to accommodate that additional flow. One other item in terms of construction schedule, we're also, as part of stakeholder involvement, I guess, we've been in contact with the owners of the downstream dam, and I believe there's a drawdown scheduled for sometime this year that may be favorable for construction, if we can match it up with that as well. But that's all things we need to discuss yet.
Eric, do we have a cost on this?
The other estimate, Ken might have an updated one for each crossing. I'm not.
For the Sturgeon Eddy work, including the rework on Sturgeon Eddy Road going down Memorial Park, 1.8 million. The Thomas Street is 1.2 million.
That should be the point too, because we budgeted one of these crossings for 2019 and the other one for 2020. So if there's a benefit to us to moving forward with both of them this year, we would have to come back with a budget modification.
Okay, one last question. Will we be disrupting any residential property?
No. It should all be installed within city right away.
Mr. Jean?
If I remember correctly, and Ken will probably remind us, when we put that dual water main, that raw water line in on the north end, I thought we had to put collars around to help hold it in place. Will we have to do that in this case? Oh, we will. All right.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion for the design of the river crossing siphons to move forward. Motion by Ms. Herbst. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by, give it to Mr. Forrest since he said it. Sorry, Joe. Okay. All those commissioners in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. That item carries. At this time, for item number 8, I'll open it up for public comment. If anybody would like to come forward, I ask that you state your name, your address, and if you could, to try to limit your comments to 3 minutes, please. I'm a
Dennis,
little forgiving now. So.
okay. Dennis Urbanik, 1505 Pineview Lane, Wausau. My comments are based on the Donahue study, draft A of the wastewater facilities. And basically, my first comment has to do with the, I see that Brokaw and Maine are included in the population base. I think that's a stretch. There's not enough people there to warrant spending a huge amount of money, and suggest that be deleted. My second comment has to do with our present permit that the city of Wausau has. And I believe the DNR has not followed the methodology that they utilized in the 1979-1980 Wisconsin River study, where the waste load allocation numbers were generated and where permitting levels were provided to the point sources along the river. And the reason I say that is that I think our discharge is based on incoming water conditions, and then the coming to the plant, and then what our releases would do to that, and then are set up so that during waste load allocation, at least 5 parts per million of dissolved oxygen would be maintained. Since that study, I'll say I'm not an expert on that study, but the Brokaw Pulp and Paper Mill has shut down. There's been a paper machine shut down in Merrill. There's been a groundwood mill and small paper mill shut down in Tomahawk. There's been at least, I think, 1 paper machine shut down in Tomahawk in the linerboard mill. So my sense is that the assimilative capacity upstream of our point is substantially higher and somehow I think we should be able to take advantage, if not all, part of that. Apparently, the permit from Brokaw has been moved to Mosinee. I'm not sure that's valid. I'm not sure that's consistent with the methodology developed with the study with the DNR of 1979 and 1980. What it possibly would do is, and I know they are thinking of possibly remodeling, I think that's a pig in a poke and could take a lifetime. My thought is don't remodel, is rebalance based on what is already known. And so that's my recommendation there. Another piece has to do with the scope of the study, in that there have been a number of exceedances over the years at the wastewater treatment plant. Those things do happen for a whole number of reasons. The root causes of those exceedances are not addressed in the report. And the reason I bring it up is if there is something that should be considered from the root cause of those exceedances in the design going forward, let's do that. But I really think, and this isn't to point any finger, all sorts of things happen, lightning can strike, but I think if we're going to do a lot of work there, we should make sure that we're going to engineer around any type of root causes for those exceedances. There's really part of the scope as well, I think, is very unclear. And I'll talk about BOD is what is the plant design? Is it at maximum flow, maximum BOD, maximum waste load allocation? Is it at average or is it at minimum? And I think that should be identified for all the parameters. It'd be very easy to do. A piping and instrument diagram showing the three levels and a mass balance would assure that the design is understood and agreed to by the operating and engineering personnel of the city. Doing it otherwise is a pig in a poke, and some of those alternatives, depending on what parameters you use, can be very capital expensive. And the decision should be made ahead of time, knowing what those are going to be and the appropriate capital costs brought in for that design point. I comment on this fail approach on the report, and lots of good things in the report. I find it highly unusual. I think it's like going to school, and this may not be a good example, is that either you're an A or an F. I don't believe that everything is an A or an F at the waste treatment plant or a pass-fail. I think there's some B's and some C's and maybe a couple of D's and some F's. And it should be identified as such as what is the, if we've got a lot of stuff there that's a B, then maybe we don't have to do anything over this with this project. The report states this facility is well operated and maintained, and I used those comments, which are in a number of places here, to say everything can't be a fail. I don't think, I've never seen a report that has every system in some type of failure mode. I don't think that's reasonable, and I think it just leads to potentially overspending for all these failed systems that are operating really quite well. You seem to have a reasonably good track record in meeting the compliance requirements. Capital cost methodology is unclear, inadequate. It says total capital cost is $80 million. I don't know what's included in the $80 million. Nowhere does it say it. And the capital cost discussion is very brief. 98% of what's in this, or 99%, is into discussion of process and equipment, almost nothing on capital. The Exclusions aren't defined. The probability of accomplishing the project for $80 million is not defined. I would think if the whole thing it goes forward is that if they're sure is get a guaranteed 80 million from the Donahue company, but again, I don't think that's in it. I think the project could easily be $100 million. And when you look at some of the information provided on page 75, 30% of the estimate is for unidentified items, and 30% has no definition whatsoever. So 60% of this macro approach is concerning. Lots of things. You say, what else could you have? Errors and omissions, escalation. When this is put together and when it'll be implemented, it'll be a year and a half, 2 years. A lot of costs are escalating. Specific contingency dollars, training, process startup costs, site clearance, and all sorts of things. Spare parts, maintaining operations. Contractors are going to have to spend a lot of money in order to keep the place running. It's not where you have the choice of tearing your garage down and parking your car in the neighbor's drive. So there's a lot of costs there that need to be identified. Is it in the estimate or isn't it? And so we know what we're buying. I think there's going to be increased yearly operating and maintenance costs. Those are not defined. There's this ratepayer effect. What are they by year? Maybe the first year maintenance is small, but having more equipment, more system, more processes is going to add the cost. So my suggestion is, one is update the scope. Sure, the basis is accurate by having the P&ID mass balance, whatever, that everybody knows what it's going to be. Because there's some interesting components in the system that are way undersized. You say, what are we doing? What is the bottom line? And saying we're going to be environmentally compliant, I think is great, but you have to take it another step. I think the wastewater treatment permit over time, I'm not sure the DNR followed the methodology, nor are our limits relevant for maintaining at least the 5-point DO in the river at this point in time. And then a very important thing is have a meaningful and valid cost estimate would be helpful. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Again, I'll mention as far as tentatively scheduled for a media press conference for different infrastructure updates and things going on and what has been taken care of or what needs to be done. Wednesday, February 20th at 10 a.m. in this chamber, just to let the public know what's happening and part of that openness and transparency. Are there any other items that are coming before the commission? Mr. Jean?
I can't remember your name, sir, but
Dennis Urbanic.
I concur with your feelings about that, because the waste load allocation was based on a modeling of the river, and I always got the impression, because I was part of implementing that if a mill went out, that there might be more share of the river available, but apparently they're not moving on that, if I understand it correctly. Our tables are staying the same. Is that correct, Dave? The waste load allocation tables haven't been modified to reflect any mill going out of business.
The waste load allocation numbers are the same in our new permit.
As they've been.
As they've been.
Yes.
Now, the study that they're doing on the Wisconsin River, that I would think is taking those things into account as far as for our discharge limit.
So those tables could change? Or should we make that part of the question in our, whatever the correct terminology of how we're disputing the permit?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'd review that with the engineers at Donahue.
Okay. With the Penta, is that to be on the agenda, or can we talk about that?
Yeah, if you got,
Go ahead.
If you have questions,
Yeah.
yeah.
I know we had tested it previously. I don't know if we have any record of that. And that's why we ended up putting those bands on the inside of the interceptor sewer to minimize the infiltration.
Right.
But I don't remember what they were.
I don't remember either, and I really couldn't find any information on what was done, who did it, and, you know, and the products that were used.
Right.
So, I mean, we haven't put this together and shared it with the DNR yet, but we will, you know, and provide them the data and get their responses too on it, on kind of what is happening, and if there's solutions that we can do, we work with them to do that, so.
Was this prompted monitoring by the DNR, or?
No, it wasn't. It was actually prompted on some information that came out. You know, over the years, we're required to monitor penta leaving the treatment plant. We don't have a limit on it, but we just have to monitor it. And so we take grab samples, and then what's being released at the Wausau property is on composite samples. And so, but our discharge, just over the years, I mean, even back into the 90s, once in a while we get a spike, but typically we're higher than what they're discharging over at Wausau.
Especially if you consider what Wausau discharges
Right.
should be diluted by the time
Right.
it goes through the plant.
Yeah.
But our numbers are not representative of that.
So we're still getting, you know, higher hits of free product leaving the plant, which seems odd on our side. So one of the things, is there an issue that we should change the way we're sampling, or, you know?
We certainly don't have free product leaving the
No.
wastewater plant. It's in the parts per billion range.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how significant those numbers are, but they get reported to the DNR every month.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and they've never had a concern with it, but, you know, it just, it was brought up, and so we took a look at it and thought it would be good to get some more information on it, so.
That also jogs a point that I wanted to raise about the mercury. The levels coming into the plant as in relation to what is leaving the plant, it looked like it was significantly less, like, and I don't have that page open. What happens to the mercury? You must get tied up with the sludge, I'm guessing. It certainly doesn't evaporate,
Yeah, no, whatever comes in the plant has to go out one way or another.
either in the solid stream or
So
in the liquid
solids or in
stream.
the liquids. But our numbers have decreased substantially since we enacted the requirements on the dentists and the amalgam traps. But sometimes I think cleaning sewers, we might loosen something up, something might get flushed through. So sometimes we do see some spikes.
I wonder if we could do a mass calculation of the pounds leaving the liquid stream as compared to the solids, and see how close that matches to what comes in.
Yeah, I mean, we could look at that, but
Okay.
they kind of jump around. But we can see how that checks out, I guess.
Well, if we did it as an annual average,
Yeah.
it should give you a sense. Okay, thank you.
The questions that Mr. Urbanek has raised about the waste load allocation and further discussed here, Eric, is this something that we should take up as we discuss other issues with the DNR?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk to Donahue about them. I had made some notes here. I know we had brought some of this up too, because I know, Dennis, you had brought this up before, and I'll have to reread what Donahue had responded on that, and find out if there's a avenue there we could take with the DNR as well, and bring those up to them with this waste load allocation, yeah.
It'd be nice to have that on the next agenda, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
We'll try.
And also, some of these other questions that Mr. Urbanek has raised, I'm not in a position to judge their merit without closely examining that plan again. I don't have it in front of me. Can some of these items be categorized and discussed at a future meeting? My concern is this: if there are some points here that should be addressed, now is the time to do it, before we get down the road and we're not able to respond to these questions, or we have to deal with the effect because we didn't do something earlier. So, the design basis, contingencies, 30% undefined costs that Dennis has mentioned. Some of these things I think really need to be discussed again, and I'd like to see maybe a presentation at our next meeting addressing some of these.
Yeah, I think one of the things too is, we just went through the preliminary design. They do have each of the processes broke out, and there is a cost for each of the processes that they're proposing. They do have a high contingency in there right now because they're just starting final design. And so as they go through that, and I guess the facilities plan is not a design, it's a plan, it's a document and a report of, in general, what the needs are and a higher level look. And so we're quite a ways away from actual final designs where we're going to have some. I mean, it is our intention to have some more, public information and presentations on some more details. I think, as we've kind of walked through this process, that's been part of it too, because we started out with our presentation at a pretty high level and just through comments on what people really want to see. And so, in the next presentation, we could tailor that just to focus on where those costs are. I guess we tried to do that at the last presentation to kind of walk through each of the processes with those costs, but we could take another look at that and see if we can break it down, get into some more details on that.
We'll bring it forward for the public and for all of you to see, because I'm sure there's questions. I don't want any questions further down the road. As you had stated, Jim, now's the time to get it done.
Well, yeah, and as a public servant, I don't want to be out in the public talking about 80 million and it comes in as 110. That's not a position I want to be in, and that's not fair to the public.
That makes two of us.
Okay.
Anything else that's coming before the commission today? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Not everybody at once, okay? Motion by Mr. Jean. Do I have a second? By Ms. Herbst. Those commissioners in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We're adjourned.